Okay, well, good morning and welcome to the Almond Conference. SGMA, or the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, is one of the single biggest regulatory challenges facing California agriculture today. And with the majority of almonds in critically overdrafted basins, and this includes hundreds of thousands of acres in wide areas, if it's not top of mind now, it probably will be soon. Groundwater sustainability plans, or GSPs, have been submitted for most of the San Joaquin Valley, and the remaining ones, including in the Sacramento Valley, are due in less than 2 years. And although there are many variables, some expected impacts from SGMA are water shortages, more expensive water, and impacts to land values. And of particular concern is the amount of estimated fallowing that will be needed to get basins to sustainability. On the solution side, there are optimistic estimates that as much as a quarter of groundwater overdraft could be addressed by recharge. But how can the almond community support that effort, and what are the challenges to maximizing recharge? Today, we have three speakers that I'll introduce in a moment, and they will all address some of these very large hurdles that we all face to maximizing recharge. I do want to say up front that locally developed plans are fundamental to SGMA. Recharge may not work in all basins. There's no one size fits all approach. And it isn't the only tool in the toolbox for achieving sustainability. That said, recharge is the largest strategy outlined in submitted GSPs, and the Almond Board has invested in recharge research, with the results showing the apparent safety of recharge during winter dormancy. One hurdle being addressed by the Almond Board is grower adoption and simply understanding recharge. So we, along with Sustainable Conservation, are developing new guidance resources for almond growers, describing how to assess their property and the bigger picture and role of recharge in reaching basin-wide sustainability. So now to the speaker introductions. Addressing policy hurdles is Stacy Sullivan. Stacy's policy director at Sustainable Conservation, and he's very engaged in many of the policy discussions happening in Sacramento that cover recharge. Next, we're going to have Scott Hamilton. He's going to be addressing infrastructure. He's very active in the San Joaquin Valley Water Blueprint and will describe this effort and infrastructure and surface water availability challenges for maximizing recharge. And then next we'll have Laura Ramos, who will be addressing drinking water. And Laura is programs manager at the California Water Institute at the California State University in Fresno. And she will describe the work the Institute has led tackling drinking water supplies for disadvantaged communities and how recharge could potentially help make water quality improvements. So first we have Stacy. Stacy, thanks for joining and speaking at the Almond Conference. And just wanted to kick it off with a question. What policies are you tracking that could potentially limit or help maximize groundwater recharge in California?
Great. Thank you, Jesse, and thank you, everybody. I'm glad to be here, at least virtually. And I just to preface what I'm going to say, I'll point out that I'm sort of an old-fashioned kind of guy, so I don't have any PowerPoint slides. You may notice me glancing down every once in a while at my notes. Please don't get alarmed. Um, anyway, there are several things that we're tracking. I was thinking I would first address some of the places where we've discovered barriers, and I try to identify what those are, and then maybe move on to some ideas that are out there of possible ways to address those. But I just start that sustainable conservation has been working on recharge since 2011. We originally were focused on developing tools, sort of along the lines of what Jesse was just talking about, tools to help identify what the optimal soils were, what the best sites were for doing recharge, particularly on farm recharge. But very quickly, we ran into the issue of water rights. Basically, do you have a right to the water that you're talking about recharging? There is a lot of confusion and wariness about who has a water right, how do you get a water right, do you need one? The I'm sure that I'm not talking to people who who aren't aware of the fact that water rights are a very complicated piece of law in California. Uh, but the what we've been trying to do with sustainable conservation, when we first got engaged in this, we discovered that there was a profound lack of clarity and certainty in people's minds about how this was going to work, if they could get a water right, if it would hold up, things like this. So that's really been the focus of a lot of our work. And there are a lot of dimensions to this issue. Obviously, there are a lot of places where barriers do arise, but our focus has really been very basic on what are the barriers in the actual in fulfilling the actual requirements of a water rights petition, basically a request for water rights. And we've broken it into three basic areas where we see problems having arisen. The first one is beneficial use. Uh, Water in California, according to the state constitution, the water of the state has to be put to a beneficial use. What a beneficial use is defined by the state water board. The most common types of beneficial uses are what are known as extractive uses. You basically put the water in the ground, keep it there for a while, then you pull it out back to the surface in order to use it for an ultimate beneficial use like irrigation, municipal use, manufacturing, what have you. Uh, it gets more complicated when you start talking about non-extractive water beneficial uses. That means water that you put in the ground and you keep there. And obviously, that kind of thing is going to be very important for a lot of Sigma implementation. The problem is that the water board up to this point has been very ambiguous about what constitutes a beneficial use, a non-extractive beneficial use. And they've tended to be judged on a case-by-case basis, which is a real problem if you as a potential project applicant are trying to develop your funding or whatever. There's just a real lack of certainty. There have been some legislative attempts to try to make recharge per se a beneficial use, and they've failed miserably. Recharge is considered by the water board to be storage, same as putting water in a reservoir. You can forfeit your right to it if you don't put it to a beneficial use within 5 years. So there's with the growing interest in putting water in the ground for purposes of SIGMA implementation and avoiding the undesirable effects, there's a real need to get some clarity on this issue of beneficial use. The second aspect of it is water availability analysis. So what this basically means, this is you're needing to demonstrate that there is water actually available for you to divert for recharge purposes after you've taken all existing water rights into account, and you've also taken the needs, the in-stream needs for fish and wildlife and recreation into account. Uh, Determining the a lot of water rights, who has what water right, is a very complicated issue. There's no database. The records are in a lot of different places. It's a complicated issue. It's a controversial issue, and it's an aspect of this that we're not working on. We're really focused more on the actual water supply issues. But where we are concerned is how do you determine how much water is actually needed to leave in the stream in order to satisfy those in-stream uses? And there is a wide range of opinions. Anybody who's been following the revisions to the San Joaquin, the Bay Delta water quality uh, regulations is aware of that. Uh, the third element that is a source of concern is CEQA and also other environmental purpose. CEQA, you need to do CEQA as part of the water rights permit process. There are other permits which are not required by the water board per se, but that you have to have in place in order to move forward with your application. It's thinking basically of permits issued by Department of Fish and Wildlife for stream bed alteration or issues involving the California Endangered Species Act. Uh, Anybody who's had any acquaintance with CEQA at all knows that it is an extremely time-consuming process. It's a very expensive process, and it makes it impossible to act in any kind of nimble way when high flows actually exist. I mean, by the time you get your ducks in a row, the water is way out in the Pacific somewhere. So that's another area where we see significant barriers to actually being able to carry through the process of obtaining a water right for recharge. So that's a real simple litany of a lot of what could be a lot, an expanded list of uh, problems and barriers, but those are the ones we're mainly addressing. We do feel that there is some effort being made to try to address these. When we were first getting involved in this water rights issue, it was really hard to get people to pay attention. And that has changed a lot in the last 5 years. And there are a number of state agencies that are making efforts to try to find ways to address this. The first is the governor's office. The water resilience portfolio included a couple of recommendations, one to establish an interagency task force to deal with SGMA implementation. Another is find ways to expedite water recharge. And The interagency task force is a great idea. Everybody who's encountered them knows that state agencies exist in very rigid silos. Sometimes those silos exist within an agency, and it's an issue that people have been trying to address for a long time. So far, it hasn't really worked very well, but perhaps this governor is willing to put more muscle into the effort. But so there's the governor's office. Department of Water Resources has established what they call the Flood MAR program. MAR means Managed Aquifer Recharge, basically to try to find ways to expedite multi-benefit recharge projects, that water supply, flood control, and environmental. That started with a group of subcommittees making recommendations as to where gaps needed, things that needed to be addressed in order to move this forward. I was the co-chair of the Policy Legal Subcommittee. We had a wide range of representatives in that subcommittee, including the Division of Water Rights from the State Water Board. We came up with 3 recommendations, and they go exactly to those 3 issues that I was talking about. Make it easier to deal with beneficial uses, make it easier to figure out how to do water availability analysis, and then how do you how can you address the issue of the other environmental permits that are needed? And then the Water Board. The Water Board is a couple of things. They issued guidance in April 2019 about non-extractive beneficial uses. What they basically did was apply what they called pre-existing recognized non-extractive beneficial uses to showing how they could be used to avoid 4 of the 6 undesirable effects, the 6 deadly sins in SGMA. Problem is there that we sort of go back to what I was saying earlier. They're saying you can use these existing non-extractive beneficial uses, but those have been just judged on a case-by-case basis. They're not really reliable. So it kind of folds us back to the original problem. The Water Board has been hoping to road test this, have people file applications, and then refine the process through back and forth there. But the water managers that we've talked to are very wary of that. They really want to get more clarity in terms of what the possible consequences could be if they file an application. So at this point, I would say both sides are waiting to see what the other one does. The other thing they've done is create a new streamlined water rights permit for flood flows, where they expedite the water availability analysis. They basically create a threshold of 90% of the peak daily flow of the stream, and anything above that would be able to be used for recharge. That is an interim number. As far as I know, nobody's made use of that yet, but it's been around. I think it's been around for less than a year, so we'll see if anybody takes advantage of that. There are a lot of efforts out there to try to both within the Water Board and within larger groups to try to determine what the in-stream environmental flow needs are of basically of every stream in the state, and obviously that's going to take a real long time. And as I said, there's a wide range of opinions about what that could consist of. So, just to try to wrap up a little bit here, I realize I've just been racing through this, but um, I would say that it's heartening to see that these state agencies are recognizing that this is an issue that needs to be addressed. And I think Sigma has definitely been the wake up call there. Um, are what they're proposing enough? Are they pointed in the right direction? I think what we need is honest conversations addressing those questions between both water users and state agencies. And if the answers are no, then what is going to work? Because it's very important to keep we as sustainable conservation really try to be outcome focused. I mean, what is the goal that we are trying to achieve? And it is absolutely essential that the state develop a holistic, resilient water network, water system, and resolving these issues having to do with recharge is going to be an essential part of that.
That's a great introduction to what is clearly a really difficult hurdle to overcome, but appreciate you injecting a little bit of optimism, especially these days. It's very much appreciated. So thank you, Stacy. And next, we're going to go to Scott Hamilton. And Scott, I know you've been heavily involved in the San Joaquin Valley Water Blueprint, and I'm hoping you can help us understand what it is, why it came about, and what it's trying to accomplish.
Well, thanks, Jesse. Yeah. So the blueprint's been working on some of the really challenging problems that the San Joaquin Valley has been facing. We have seen for some time that Sigma is going to create some really serious problems for the valley if we can't bring more water into the valley. The initial estimates that we've got coming out of the UC Berkeley study is that if we can't develop more water projects, we're probably looking at a loss of close to 1 million acres of farmland, 42,000 lost jobs in agriculture in the valley, 65,000 jobs in total, and $7 billion in lost revenues and incomes. So while the blueprint is focused on sort of 4 different aspects, the main one I wanted to talk about today was just the water supply components. The other components are flood mitigation, an environmental vision for the valley, and help for disadvantaged communities. And Laura's going to be talking more about disadvantaged communities. So let me just focus on the water supply issues. The way the blueprint's been approaching the problem is through 4 steps. First of all, we really wanted to understand how big the problem was and specifically where it was, and then what new water was available to help groundwater sustainability, how we would move that new water from where it is now to where it's needed, and then how we put it to beneficial use. And the beneficial use question was really what Stacey was talking about, so I won't be touching much on that either today. All right, so in terms of where the need is, really all of the subbasins in the San Joaquin Valley are in severe overdraft. The biggest challenges are faced by Madera County and Kern County, but all of the subbasins in between Madera and Kern all have significant challenges. If we use all of our local water supplies that are available, we may be able to come up with sort of 250,000 acre feet. But the total shortage that we're looking at is between 1.5 and 1.8 million acre feet. So if we fully utilize our local supplies, we're still going to have a very significant problem. The question then becomes, where do we get that water from? And the only place, while there are some high flows on the Kings that will likely be used in the King subbasin, and there are high flows on the San Joaquin River that could be used through the existing Friant place of use, nearly all of this new water that we're going to need is really going to have to come from the Delta. So the Delta on average has about 10 million acre feet a year on average, that's surplus. So we have some really wet years where we have a lot of surplus water in the delta, and then we've got a lot of years where there's just no surplus water in the delta. And in most years, the delta ecosystem just can't sustain any more water exports. So we're really looking at this high flow water. That really comes in the winter and spring times, but during those periods, we can't divert that water because of regulations to protect endangered fish, primarily salmon and delta smelt. So we are exploring the use of, it's not new technology, it's been around for a while. It just has not been used in the delta yet. The concept here is to take the water out of the bottom of the water column, essentially using a tile drain system. And as long as the downward velocities are slow enough, then it won't hurt the fish. The way that would be implemented in the delta is to go onto a delta island, put in the tile drain system, put in the gravel beds, build collector channels and pumping plants, and then remove the levees at the either end of the structures so that the water can flow back and forwards over the top of that. In that way, we've provided a natural habitat for the fish and a way of diverting the water without hurting the fish. So does that actually create enough water for us on average to divert? So we had MBK engineers look at that issue, and they ran a large number of scenarios. But when we look at fish frame diversions, it looks like we can divert between 1.5 and 1.7 million acre feet with this new technology. So that was really encouraging news. That means that there is enough water, and it looks like about 15% of the flood flows in the delta. If we could divert that, then we would have enough water for the valley. So that takes us to the next question: how do we bring that water into the valley? At the moment, we're looking at two new canal systems, one coming off the end of the Delta Mendota Canal in Madera County, and then another one off the California Aqueduct that would really go off the heart of the valley through the northern part of Kern County, in the Tulare, Kauai, and Kings subbasins, with diversions also coming off for the Tulare Lake subbasin. Just having the fish flowing diversions should provide enough water without having to build new conveyance facilities for Kern, Delta Mendota, and the west side. So if we can do all that, then we can get the water to the places where it's needed. This system is very different from a traditional irrigation system. Traditionally, we've built irrigation systems to meet on-farm demands as they occur. Essentially to meet the peak irrigation demands in the summertime. This approach is very different. This is going to be winter and springtime water. So it's totally focused on diverting water for recharge and to achieve groundwater sustainability through a variety of recharge methods. So this is going to be a long and difficult process. I think we've got a lot of political issues trying to get more water out of the delta. We've got the water rights issues that Stacey's been talking about, and overcoming the CEQA problems, the environmental problems, the regulations, and just the expense of it is going to be difficult. But the consequences of not doing anything right now are very severe. So we certainly think that this is a battle that's worth fighting right now. So Jesse, that's all I have. Let me turn it back to you.
Okay, Scott, thank you for taking on such a complex topic and really packing a lot into that. Next up, we have Laura Ramos. And as Scott mentioned, Laura's going to talk about drinking water supply. California has really been expressing a strong interest in making sure that every California has clean drinking water. And in particular, you have several projects that you're working on that really make this connection between the potential for recharge to be a part of the solution to clean drinking water. So Laura, thank you for being here today, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Jesse, for inviting me to talk about these projects and how we can all help some of the disadvantaged communities. Fresno State has been working on multiple projects that benefit communities that are dependent on private wells or small water systems for their drinking water. Some of those options are that they can consolidate to a larger system. They can put in treatment plants that will benefit a small community. But as history has shown, that sometimes it's not the best, because then there's operating finances that aren't being able to be met. And then there are some point of entry as well as point of use treatments that can be used, but are not always financially feasible. The other option is groundwater recharge. And Fresno State did a consolidation feasibility study of 12 small water systems to connect to the city of Fresno. And these small systems were fortunate enough that we're close enough to a large water system that was open to consider consolidating them. But that is not always the case. So for communities that are not close enough to a community, doing recharge to elevate their groundwater quality and level can be an option. Fresno State did some preliminary work, and we hope to be working on this more in the future, but we did some preliminary work on around the Madera Canal and the Bryant Kern Canal. And as you can see from the map, we started with the canals and then moved forward and overlaid soil that is ideal for recharge. And we show it in red, green, and yellows to show which areas are best for recharge. And as Stacy mentioned, if the water is available and there are rights to that water, we should be strategic about which soils and which area we select to do that recharge. And as Scott mentioned, SGMA is going to cause some of the land to be fallowed, and there's some GSPs or sustainable groundwater management plans that mention groundwater recharge as some of their projects. So it's important that we do that strategically and we put them in places that are going to have multiple benefits. In the next map, I overlaid some disadvantaged communities. And these communities come from the Human Right to Water Act. And they're not all of the communities in those areas near the Bryant Kern Canal and the Madera Canal, but there are communities that either currently have a contamination issue or recently came out of a contaminated issue with their groundwater. In the next map, I overlaid almond fields from data from 2018. That was publicly available from 2018. And I just wanted to show that if land is being fallowed, or if there's that excess water that can be recharged during the winter months when the crop are dormant, it is key that we pick key areas. And in the next map, as you can see, I zoomed into near the Del Rey area. And there are some farms that are half in the green area and half in red because of their soil. So green means their soil is ideal for recharge, and red that it is not. So you want to find a area that it will have multiple benefits, such as assist with the groundwater level and quality near a disadvantaged community such as Del Rey, and is close enough to, in this case, an almond field that can be recharged. As I mentioned earlier, this is preliminary work, so there still needs to be a lot of research done. And the first one is data collection. And that what I showed you from the map does not include other canals or ways to get the water to this area. So you could find an ideal area that can be used for wetlands or other environmental benefits. But if you can't get the water there, then that might not be the ideal one, even though it meets all of the other criteria. So we still need to do some work to overlay some of the infrastructure that is available on those maps, as well as where do the GSPs have plans for recharge, what other storage facilities are close by. And then from there, we would like to rank some of these sites to see which ones are the best ones. Do some community engagement, because we don't want just a recharge basin to show up and near a community and the community not know what it is, how it's going to work, how it benefits them, and just to include them in the process. And then we plan to do some technical feasibility assessments as well as financial feasibility assessments, so to make sure that these areas meet all of those needs. As also, as Scott mentioned, the blueprint has a lot of partners, and a lot of these projects, including the one that we did with the city of Fresno, isn't successful without a large group of people coming together to support them. And specifically to the city of Fresno one, Self-Help Enterprise, the city of Fresno, the Water Board, and Fresno State were involved in helping them. This bigger project will have to include them plus other partners. And so we've shown that we can all come together for a benefit that will be strategic enough to help in multiple areas. There is some current funding and regulations related to some of these areas that can possibly help. SB 200, which is a drinking water project with this SAFER program. And this bill is there to help establish a fund for safe and affordable drinking water for some of these small communities. Prop 68 has some groundwater treatment and remediation grant programs to help reduce the contamination in the groundwater, as well as Prop 1, which has some funding for water quality, supply, and infrastructure improvements. So as I've mentioned earlier, it's just about partnering and finding the right ways to fund some of these projects and be very strategic about the sites that we identified to do recharge. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. And I, on that note of partnering, I just wanted to open it up to maybe bring it back to Scott or Stacy. What opportunities do you see for partnering and addressing sort of these shared concerns and developing multi-benefit projects that might give some momentum to doing groundwater recharge?
Well, let me start. I think it's a really good question. The problems, and Laura said it really well, the problems we're facing now are really difficult to find, to develop solutions for by yourself. In many cases, the problems are so broad and that finding a solution to them touches a lot of different groups and different people. And I think as we move forward here, it's going to be really important to reach out to all of the stakeholders that could be affected by these projects. In some cases, like Laura mentioned, people are going to have concerns just about how the project's going to affect them. But on the flip side, so many of these projects really need to be developed and designed to maximize the benefits, to get these dual or triple benefits out of these projects. And so to get people's input early on and get them engaged while we're still in the design phase is really important in terms of trying to maximize the benefits we can get out of the projects.
And Stacy, I don't know if you want to talk to kind of how some of these statewide policies might come together in groundwater recharge.
once again, sort of in early days yet, but there are several forums, structures that are coming together where people who don't normally talk to one another we're very big on trying to get people who don't normally talk to one another to do so. But I think that as I was saying, I think there is at least a glimmer of will in the government, in some of the state agencies to try to deal with these issues. But I think that basically people coming together and disparate parties finding common ground. I think about it as like Venn diagram approaches, where you focus on the overlapping part of your circles and not get off into the fringes. But I think that in a way, one of the things that's important, particularly when we think about where we're talking about these problems occurring, compared to where the bulk of, say, the legislature comes from, is like building bridges to try to raise people's awareness across these lines. But I do have hope that this is being recognized as something that needs to be addressed by a wide range of interest groups, and I think. But the important thing is to find a kind of unity of voice, which is where I come back to the Venn diagram thing. It's like we're not going to work out all of our difficulties, but let's focus on the areas where we agree, and that I think can create some real momentum in Sacramento.
I guess I want to provide an opportunity for anybody, any of the panelists, to ask a question or make a comment just in general about what we may have heard today, and kind of directly to growers. What would you say if a grower is considering recharge? How would you describe the benefit, and any tips towards kind of finding these common interests and developing these multi-benefit projects?
Well, let me just start off again then. So, Jesse, really good question. We really have a huge lack of recharge capacity in the valley right now. Our initial numbers of that we need about another 10,000 second feet of recharge capacity. So, in round figures, that's essentially sort of two new Friant Kern canals that have to go to recharge. We don't have that much recharge capacity in the valley right now. And even when I looked at what was in the GSPs, we are, even if we did all of that, we're still woefully short of recharge capacity. So the on-farm recharge is probably the most cost-effective way of recharging water right now. But and so either with a flood mar going onto just fallow fields in the wintertime is great, where you've got the right soils and you've got the right crop rotation to make that happen. I think what people are really interested in, Jesse, and I don't know if this is being discussed elsewhere, but aren't you working on strategies of just how to utilize almond orchards to recharge at times when there's very little risk to the crop?
The Almond Board, thanks, Scott, for asking me a question. I appreciate it. The Almond Board has been doing research into this, and we started early. And I think one of the reasons was because we've got a lot of acreage in the valley. And like you said, it looks like we'll need a lot of acreage. And the recharge basins that are out there right now just don't have the capacity to take what would be required to get these basins into sustainability. So I think that was a big driver. as far as why we wanted to address almonds. And we wanted to look just at the time of year when trees are dormant. I guess we were hoping that applying excess water in the wintertime wouldn't damage yields or wouldn't harm tree health. And the research that we've done so far does look positive. So that's really a big part. And, the other benefit of at least some almond orchards is they're along existing conveyance channels. And I know that's something that sustainable conservation has really done, is trying to overlay where we have existing conveyance and where we have crops that or other working lands that really have the right conditions at the right time of year when water is available to take that excess water and hopefully do it at a very economically beneficial price point. So that almonds have been researching this, and I think we will be having new guidance documents just to help growers that are thinking about this, and sort of what issues should they think about in terms of pest or disease management, applying excess water, what other things as far as nutrient management might they want to think about. And then also timing. The work we've done so far is really focused on dormant season applications. So we are aware of there may be situations, like I said at the top, every basin is different, and there's no one size fits all approach. So when you look at opportunities to do recharge, you might think about basins, or you might look at on-farm recharge as well.
So that's really exciting, Jesse. I'm really pleased that Almond Board has taken that initiative. It sounds like most of what you're being focused on right now is really on the surface application. What have you had any reactions from the farmers that have tried it? How they found it? What was their reaction to flooding their orchards in the wintertime?
Yeah, I think the ones that have participated both in our research and also the ones that Sustainable Conservation has worked with, and the examples that we have, I think have found it to be safe and effective. I think we really don't have much of a cohort yet of growers that have tried it. I think, and I want to turn it over to Stacy. I mean, I think growers are experimenting with recharge, and I think they're, as growers always do, are experimenting and learning as they go. Does Sustainable Conservation have any messages for growers that might be thinking about doing recharge, or what's your experience been out in the field?
Well, I would say that the one message that I would want to deliver right away if someone was interested is letting them know that there are tools that are being developed. There are tools that are already in place, and there's more guidance, like you were referring to, Jesse, that is coming. We've been particularly focused on recently on developing water quality guidance for the application, because there are issues there about mobilizing legacy contaminants or whatever that need to be considered. But there are also places where it could actually provide long-term benefit in terms of dilution. But I think that there's been a lot of thought, and I think a fair amount of work done on crop compatibility, and certainly with our groundwater recharge assessment tool. The tools that really can help, you can build multiple layers in to help evaluate, because one of the things that we're very aware of, and this has been true with our experience in almonds, and I'm sure yours as well, is there's just kind of a visceral reaction to the idea of like putting a whole bunch of standing water at the base of a tree. It just gives people the willies, and so just being able to demonstrate that there is this data, there are these tools, and to make and our job, your job, whatever, is to make them as readily available as possible to the people who do. I mean, if somebody expressed interest, you want to jump on them. You know, it's like, go for it. We're here to help you.
Well, and
Just,
Laura,
do you mind if I
you
chime
want to
in?
jump in here? Yeah.
Yes,
Sure.
sorry. Just really quick, because you asked what can a farmer do, and I think just keeping an open mind and being flexible, like Stacy said, there's a lot of tools, there's a lot of resources that are going to become available, and just being open to doing it and to being flexible on where, you know, don't be stringent on where you want your recharge to be, but learn from the tools that maybe in this corner of your field isn't the best, but this other one will have multiple benefits. And just thinking of it that way, that I will be open to this and flexible.
Yeah, and to the multi-benefit aspect, I mean, I think it's interesting that you and your program is looking at specifically recharge as a possible way to help address this issue of clean drinking water. Because as Stacy said, often the concern is more that it could harm drinking water.
Yes, and I think we still have a lot of learning to do. As you and Stacy said, there's a lot of research still going on. We're still not completely sure what will happen with those legacy contaminants, or where in the aquifer, upper aquifer, lower aquifer we're at. So I think there's a lot of things that we're going to learn in the next couple of years. We are assuming that adding surface clean water will dilute some of those and will elevate the groundwater level and the quality, but I'm not sure that we know yet for sure. So just being open and flexible to doing these things so that we can learn from, so we can all learn and benefit from them.
Yeah, we've had experience with done some research where we've shown that recharge, there could be like a short-term spike in the contaminant level, which is followed by a longer-term dilution. So you know, that's something, you know, in terms of thinking about short-term versus long-term applications on drinking water, which is part of the deal these days anyway, was a short-term provision of alternative supply, but long-term remediation of the source. So things like that need to be taken into account, obviously.
Yes, it's a time for tremendous creativity. And I just I think want to just stop right here, see if there are any last comments by any of the speakers.
So let me try another question here for Laura and Stacy, I think. It struck me over the last year or so, how many great things are already happening in the Valley. Like I was in, you know, so often it seems like we've sort of got one thing in mind in terms of approaching a problem. But then we get out and we see how somebody else is doing it, and you know, it's like a light bulb going off. And this sort of struck me in a couple of different ways on different issues. You know, first of all, you know, I've seen recharge basins go in that are purely for the purpose of recharge. There's absolutely no environmental benefit. And yet then I look at, you know, what projects like what Terabella has done, where it's, and also the Kern Water Bank, where they've got a far more environmentally friendly approach that really does sort of the dual benefit standards. Now, often too, that comes with an expense. And so I think we're going to have to figure out that. So that was sort of one example. The other one is I gave a presentation at the Arvin Community Services District. And Laura, it was a great example of what you were talking about. The town of the Arvin Madison Water Storage District has a recharge pond essentially just up gradient from the town of Arvin. And the town of Arvin has seen the benefits of those recharge facilities, both in terms of water quality and in terms of groundwater levels. Obviously, that the benefit there depends a lot on what contaminants you're dealing with. But it was interesting to hear them, and about their experience there. And then the other one is with, if we can't go with sort of a traditional flood mire approach where we're putting water on the surface, we're seeing, particularly in almond orchards and pistachio orchards, the deep sort of reverse tile drain systems that people are putting in. Clearly not as cheap as going with the surface application for people that are concerned about what a surface application might do. The subsurface approach seems to sort of provide more separation between chemicals that are being applied on the surface and then when the water's actually going into the recharge basin. So all of that was by way of a fairly lengthy lead on is since both of you work in this area, how can we sort of demonstrate, get the word out about what's going on in these different places with these new ideas that are coming about? And when farmers have got questions about what it's going to do, or communities have got questions, how do we sort of disseminate the information and get people comfortable with some of these new ideas that are coming out?
Scott, as you were talking and giving your example and asking your question, all I kept thinking was of the project that I saw near Kerman, Mendota area. There's a farmer that has a huge area that is focused on habitat restoration and the environment. And he saw a financial benefit to having that as part of his farm. And there's a big recharge and storage area that I don't think we do a great job, as you mentioned, at telling the story. If he was able to do it, then what can we learn from them and replicate it and do a better job at telling that story? This farmer was able to see such a benefit that he hired a biologist that is solely focused on making sure that the habitats are there, that the animals that they're counting, that the environment is benefiting from this area, and that he's strategic about where he puts those recharge and storage basins. And it's not always the best for him in land-wise, but he knows that it's the best for the environment and for recharging. And so I think just telling those stories, we need to do a better job at doing that, because I've been in this area for years, and I just learned about them 2 years ago, and I was stunned at what he's able to accomplish. And so just we need to do more of that.
Yeah, that's a great story.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that I know that some of our colleagues at the Nature Conservancy and at the Environmental Defense Fund have been working with growers and landowners to do those kind of dual benefit habitat and recharge basin projects. I sort of see there two ends of this. It's there is, I was talking before, bringing together people from different sort of maybe perspectives, but who have a shared vision of what this is, and putting them, because that kind of thing has a potency when you go into, I worked in the state assembly for many years, and I was a committee consultant, and it's if somebody came, if somebody from the Sierra Club and somebody from the Realtors came in and was talking about the same thing, you paid attention. Whereas if it was just one or the other, so what? I've heard it before. So I think those kind of alliances have a potential to just draw people's attention, and then the stories can take over. The other end of it that I was talking about is that before I worked in the legislature, I worked for a sustainable agriculture organization, the Community Alliance for Family Farmers, and we had a lot of success with developing IPM programs because we figured out ways to get farmers to talk to farmers. As opposed to some, pointy-headed enviro from San Francisco dropping in and saying, "Oh, this is a really good idea." And so, sort of at both ends, I think there are possibilities to develop lines of communication that can make this a lot more effective. Because there's one thing I know, it's farmers are likely to believe other farmers.
Well,
Thanks,
on that note,
on that note, I just really want to thank you guys so much for sharing your stories and sharing it with our almond growers today and learning more about your various perspectives and how they can come together in some of these great examples and projects. So thank you guys so much for speaking at the Almond Conference today.
Thank you for
Well,
inviting
thank-
us.